start by thanking Piraye and the organizing committee for inviting me for this keynote, and to really thank you for being among you. It is a wonderful feeling to be among the LinkPaths community, but also a little bit of a scary feeling to see so many big names in link data. So I hope that my presentation will be relevant to you. I will start out first by discussing my positionality as a white professional doing work in colonial archives of enslaved populations. The way that I see my role is that I started out processing, digitizing records of the Jewish community in Barbados. And inside there, I saw populations that have been silenced through the imperial apparatus. So I see it as my duty as an archivist to use my position and the funding that I have through the University of Bonn to conduct this doctoral research, to bring to light such voices that have been silenced in archives. So an overview of my presentation, I will start with an introduction of the case study, which is the current research, and an overview of colonial archives. The second part will reflect the title of the presentation, what we think we link. Then I will continue with what we actually link, and I will finish with some suggestions and ways to go forward. And at any point, if something is not understood, please feel free to stop me or ask any question. So the case study is the community of enslaved people in Jewish households in Bridgetown, and I will share a little bit about the background and methods. The Jewish community of Barbados is a part of a constellation of Jewish communities existing in the Caribbean, communities that came to be after the expulsion from Spain, but through a series of traumatic displacement and expulsions, starting in 1492 from Spain. Then the community goes to Amsterdam. From Amsterdam, some go to Dutch Brazil. You will see the tip of Brazil in Recife. When Dutch Brazil falls to Portugal in 1654, these people yet again have to leave their place and migrate. Some of them will arrive to Barbados in 1654. Others will continue and they will be shipwrecked in Jamaica, and 23 of them will arrive to New Amsterdam, which was New York back then. So again, you see a pattern of already expulsions and immigration when the people arrive. And this is a Bridgetown. This is a map from a later map. It's a mid-18th century map where you will see up here the synagogue. It was given pretty much out of the city, and the cemetery. I will not get into details about that, but just to show you, here is Swan Street, because most of the Jews of the island had their houses there. It was also pejoratively called Jew Street. In the synagogue historic district, we have intersection of identities, racial and religious identities. Not only Jews, but we have Quakers adjacent to the synagogue. It was the biggest Quaker cemetery up to the end of the 18th century. It was the biggest Quaker cemetery in North America. And we have, of course, the Anglican majority, the enslaved people, all together living in the historic district surrounding the synagogue. The community itself, despite being on a small island, I showed you previously the many Jewish communities in the Caribbean, but also the community itself, due to its family members being all over the world, in Europe, So they have links that are based on kin and trade ties with the world. You see with the North American colonies, with European cities, Amsterdam, Hamburg, Lisbon, and then with the rest of Caribbean Jewish communities, Curacao, Suriname, Jamaica, and from Charleston up to Newport. As you can imagine, this is a community that is producing records, not only among themselves, but also with their relationships with the imperial authorities. So we can talk of a community of records, records that are dispersed, of course, and records that I will be studying for my research will be records such as wills, housing and taxation records, gravestone of people, material cultures, and deeds. There is a huge amount of material that can be derived, actually, depending on how deep somebody wants to go in and extract data. So this will be, you know, the project will need to be scoped to make it manageable. So when, but as I mentioned, these are records that are dispersed. Where can we find then the traces of Caribbean Jewish communities, and which one is the metropole, let's say? Right now, material are existing in archives, not only in Barbados, but also in the US, in the UK, in London specifically, in Amsterdam. There is a correspondence with Curacao. So where we can find traces affects how we can do our research and what kind of infrastructure we will deal with. So when we are talking about Caribbean Jewish communities, then the question is up, which one is the metropole? I would answer all and really none at all. Also, some people might say, what about the current Jewish communities? Well, the current Jewish communities in their majority, except some exceptions like Curacao, are Ashkenazi. The Sephardic communities ended by the late 19th century, and then Ashkenazi, which means Eastern European and Central European Jews, arrived in the beginning by the 1930s, together with the rise of the Nazism in Europe. And so the aim is, considering, of course, how dispersed and how rich material it is, the aim for this specific project is to enrich it, linking it to other linked data information, particularly spatial information. This a very interesting project for my purposes is the LATAM Gazetteer that is being developed by the Pelagius group, and then of course the Hebrew Kima Gazetteer. And I would argue that the Anglophone Caribbean communities would be an interesting case study and would provide a link in a sense between the two. So another interesting conceptual model that I would like to delve more into detail is the linked traces concept, and see how it could and it can be applied in this project. The one issue that I can see is here when it mentions that trace data is a web resource with permanent URIs. And as we will see a little bit later, this is not always the case, and this is not always possible. So this is, I would like maybe to talk more in this conference and discuss the trace data model. One way that to annotate material in this research is with the Recogito tool that already provides a very useful way to tag documents and find to code them for specific information that I would like to surface. And then due to the amount of people present, but also those that cannot be retrieved from the documents, I will be using a prosopographical approach, not for shedding light more to prominent people of the community, but to see maybe people that cannot really be, that do not have even a name, maybe see them in a web of relationships. The way that I see prosopography is as a collective biography of a web of people. And the aim is essentially to understand a silenced community, the enslaved, through a community that has been researched well enough. And I use the phrase well enough because, of course, we could be researching this community, the Jewish community, for 500 more years based on the amount of material that there are and the amount of possibilities that can happen. But at this point, based on scholarship that has already been conducted on funding and other initiatives, this has been a topic that has been studied, I will say, well enough. There are also projects that that inspire me that have already tried to conceptually represent enslaved people. One of these projects is on these grounds that already has developed a very robust descriptive model and presents vocabularies and other basic information for developing linked data. One issue that I see in this linked data vocabulary is the way that the source is referred. So you will see here the description about what a source is. It says it's an archival document from which the record information is drawn, and it says linked to the digitized version or the finding aid or a bibliography. So again, it's the same issue that this is not always possible to do, because as we will see later on, not so much has been really digitized despite what we might think. So one of the points that I think some of these approaches and conceptual approaches miss is the way that archival description works. Archival description promotes essentially the relationships among records, agents, and activities. Agents are any entity that has produced records, and activities are any really activity that has produced records. The important thing being the relationships among them. So one conceptual model that will be of use is this model that is being developed by the International Council on Archives. It's called Records in Context, and you will see that it's based on these four principles that I showed you before. It discusses the record, the resource, which can be one record, it can be a record set, or it can be part of a collection. And then the links with the agent, the producing agent, the activity it is based on. And so this will be a more robust approach than simply providing a description for a abstract source, originating source of the information we are working with. Another, another reason of working with already used ontologies like the On These Grounds project that I showed you is to be able to produce material in a data set that can be interoperable. And we see, one example is making it interoperable and contributing the data eventually to the enslaved project. So this was the introduction on the case study, and I want a little bit now more to give more holistic view about colonial archives and what I will be calling data dependencies. So this is the a historic map of the Caribbean Sea. This is a map view that we are used to seeing, but then essentially under this map, what lies is the way that these territories were belonging to different European imperial powers. This is the view of the colonial Caribbean at the start of the 19th century, and this image is extracted by a wonderful project. I have the link here, and I can share with whoever wants. A wonderful project by Yarimar Bonilla that she has. It's video based and it's motion, and you can see the ways that countries change sovereignties. So this is the Caribbean at the dawn of the 19th century, and then this is throughout the years. What this does is that when you see countries like that moving on the map, you can also assume that archives and papers and documents move at the same time. And essentially, this is one way that, although this is a map that shows essentially trade routes, we can also see this as a map of communication and information exchange, because essentially the archival archives and records back then were being moved on ships. And so this is also, in a sense, the infrastructure. We can speak, like, we can assume this is also the infrastructure of colonial archives. So what does this do to archives? This movement, these changes in time and space. This results in fragmentary archives, archives that are displaced, misplaced. Sometimes the term misplaced means somebody misplaces something so that it cannot be found, not simply by mistake. Archives that have been migrated at the end of colonialism in Africa, nearly all their archives ended up in London. Archives that are destroyed intentionally or unintentionally. Inaccessible hidden archives, archives that have not been described, so they cannot be accessed. They don't have even an inventory online. And archives that might be censored. So we end up seeing really only what we know exists out there is only one very small part of what is really out there. So there is a push usually for big data sets, but where are the GLAM big data? They are backlogged because simply people, governments do not see the priority to fund archival work and archivists. And so they are uncatalogued. Some are paywalled, inaccessible, as we saw before, censored and are fragile, and some are in private collections. So setting out to create big data, we are already limited on what we can do. And then data sets are always partial representations of reality, because we might think that we start out with everything, which is not the case. We already saw that we start out with a very limited volume of material. Out of everything, there are only some things that are deemed important to preserve and not throw away. There are only a subset of these things that are eventually finding their way into analog archives and are being made accessible and not being held in storage or backlogs. There are only part of this material that are being digitized because of funding and selection criteria, and only a partial amount of these digitized archives that, again, due to funding and resources, can and will become data sets. And so the data sets that we make and the data sets that we are using are essentially what has survived and what has come to our hands. We might even say that the data sets that we see are really what the empire wanted us to see, because things that were deemed inappropriate or secretive already have been destroyed or are being kept inaccessible. In this process that I just discussed, we see a set of archival dynamics. This is a framework that has been nicely explained in an article by Jared Drake, Blood at the Root. What the empire does and what archives do is they include some people and exclude others. They determine who can possess or dispossess, who can inherit, let's say, a name, and who can disinherit. And essentially, they embody and they disembody the reality. You will excuse me for the following 2-3 slides. They are a little bit dense, but after that, it will get better. So one of the things that I will be doing in this doctoral research is to develop a concept that I will be calling archival dependency. What I mean by this is that archives are the institutional background that essentially determine which voices will be preserved in the historical record. And especially colonial archives create, legitimize, and enforce dependencies among dependent actors. Colonial archives classify people. According to the ways that they classify people, they are also creating these dependencies and they are enforcing them. These kinds of archival dependencies end up being replicated in our data. These archival dependencies, as we saw, do not disappear. They cascade down with each reformatting of the material. Either we copy them with the Xerox or we digitize them. Digitization essentially perpetuates the dominant voices and obscures others, because if you think how one digitized page is essentially an image, then some voices that cannot be seen or cannot be extracted are remaining silenced. And so, starting from archival dependencies, I will argue that archives, again, engender, support, and perpetuate asymmetrical dependencies of data. And of course, these archival dependencies produce archival silences. They produce archival silences at specific moments, and this is the framework developed by Michel Rolf Trio. The silences are created at the making of the sources, at the time of the making of the archives, at the time of the fact retrieval, when we make our own narratives in the way that we combine data, and then at the way that we read this data to make history. Just to illustrate a little bit more this concept of cascading violence that I also is that essentially seeing the way that archives create all these dependencies, the history that gets written is the one, of course, that gets funded today. Digitization and data work are resource intensive works. What we see online is a selective view of the past. Archives are already selective views of the past, and then abscesses and gaps in the physical documents persist and are magnified. And so we need to see archival silences as the embodiment of archival violence, this cascading violence that archives create and enact on documents. This is an extract from Markup Bodies by Jessica Marie Johnson that really says that there is no bloodless data in slavery's archive. Data is the evidence of terror. And the idea of data as fundamental and objective information obscures rather than reveals the scene of the crime. This reflects what I said before, that what we see today is actually an evidence of terror in the way that this data has come to us through different machinations of the empire. And the way then that we create links, what it does is that it reifies what is already visible. So our systems, our epistemological approaches, and our tools are based on what is visible. Again, sometimes we discuss about linking facts, and if we link only what a document says, the facts that it contains, that reinforces all the imbalances and dependencies that have been inherent in the past. To make a little bit more clear what I mean when I say the silences in colonial records and what we cannot essentially link if we don't go purposefully about it, I will give some examples. For example, starting from our seemingly very simple situation, disambiguating and linking geodata. Excuse me. We have a place name in Barbados. It's called Hastings. Obviously, it has replaced an earlier Arawak Native American place name that now does not exist anymore. Hastings, of course, is a legacy of empire based on Hastings in the UK, which was the place of the famous Battle of Hastings. And so then, in between them, you know, of course, they have different coordinates. Is it really the same name? What is in between them? Not only an ocean, but a colony, and then even death. We can even argue. Another example is this issue of the Barbados Mercury Gazette, the issue of April 30. We see the first page, which is business as usual in this slave-holding colony. But this is a misleading paper because in 16th April, there was the biggest slave revolt in the history of Barbados. And the newspaper actually was closed, it was shut down for 15 days. So this is the first issue that the newspaper issues after the revolt. So nothing is written in the first page, and only in the second page there is a very little article about the revolt and its suppression. And then semantics. We see something, and then we see this word, valuable. That is also a problematic concept, value. How would you tag this thing valuable? As here, Kim Hall has argued, these people are worth a lot, but they are worth nothing. And then there are some things that are said and not said. This is a runaway ad that really breaks my heart. Every time that I read it, it speaks about a black boy that was picked up in a dying condition, 14 or 15 years of age. And it says, who will give no account of himself or his owner, but speaks French and English remarkably well. So again, you read something on the paper, but then there are so many things that are unsaid. And then, of course, going beyond documents, because I have been speaking about documents, but considering how partial they are, we really need to look in other places. For example, material culture. Here, in the archaeological excavation in the synagogue courtyard, the people found pig bones, which is an irregularity considering that this is a synagogue complex. And the archaeologist argues that pig bones is surprising, of course, and can be indicative of the enslaved Africans who also lived and worked within the synagogue compound. So again, trying to link people, traces can be found also in material culture and literally underground. Again, as Sadia Hartman has said, we cannot really always look on documents or other material for what is said, but we need to listen for the unsaid. We need to translate words that might be misconstrued. We might need to look to disfigured lives, and we must redress the colonial violence that has categorized people into numbers and has made them into fragments. Going forward, I would like to discuss some suggestions or some ideas on how to be and what to pay attention to going forward when we do linked data work. First of all, we must not forget that right now our world is a world of connections, and of course that it matters which connections get made and which ones are unmade, as Donna Haraway had said. And of course, anything that we do matters. What we link affects what we discover eventually, what we use, what gets preserved in the archives, and at the end of the day, what survives. Because if information and violence cascades down, what we do today also is a violent extraction in a sense. We extract something that might survive into the future while we leave behind something else. I would argue for slow linking. Maybe do boutique projects rather than go after big data. Maybe do thoughtful linked data where links can function as interpretation and critique. And for this slow linking, I will also refer you to an article by Andrew Prescott and Lorna Hughes, the same approach about slow digitization. I will also discuss intentional linking. Linking with the intention of not really make obvious what is there, but make obvious what is hidden and silenced, to emphasize the data dependencies among people and records, and make, in the meantime, make visible what are the legacies of the empire, which can be made visible through links and relationships among records and people, and then obviously through links of what has survived. Another way to go about is expressive linking, expressing not only the relationship between the things, but most importantly, the nature of these relationships and how they have changed over times. This goes back to the conceptual model that I showed you before, the records in context, and the relationships among records, agents, and their activities. Another way would be linking to reveal dependencies. As such, doing an ethnography of a data set. Starting by what collection is it derived from? How did this collection come to be? How it was put together? Who were the creator? When was the collection reformatted and how? Who funded the reformatting work? where is it hosted, and what was included or what was excluded. These are all points of dependencies, and these define and determine the data that remains in our hands, essentially. And again, another way we can link to show dependencies by providing different possibilities of how to relate resources. We can see resources through a common creator, and then we can understand how and why resources came to be, sources of acquisition, sources of how a collection has moved, a format or an event, a common event in the life cycle of these collections. Again, an important thing to provide a genealogy of data. Link to show the provenance of the collection. When I say provenance, it's not that we particularly, the aim is to show the legal status of the collection or the ownership of the collection, but to show what, in this way, to make visible the gaps and absences in a collection. And of course, you will see this little red dot, let's say, starting from one little information or data that you might have, essentially link back to where this information came from, to show the archival, to make obvious how this one piece of information came to be in our hands. However, I will be concluding with something that I am a little bit repetitively concluding usually my talks, which is that while we digitize and we link, essentially what happens is that material that are left behind disappear because they are not getting funded, they are not getting processed, they are not getting used. And what remains behind sometimes and not funded sometimes is lost, again violently. So I will again ask you not to forget the physical records out there. And